On Health Her Way, we're asking the questions you want answered about your body.
Together with our female healthcare experts, we're diving into the questions that might seem too scary, too silly, trivial, or taboo. No topic is off limits.
Join us as we talk about Health Her Way.
Welcome to Health Her Way. I'm Meredith Cunningham.
And I'm Brooklyn Elbert. Today we're joined with Kara Pepper. Kara is a licensed marriage and family therapist, and she is our senior mental health counselor at Covenant Children's. She specializes in supporting women and families, specifically those with babies in the NICU, and she works to provide essential support and therapy regarding a variety of issues and concerns.
Kara, thank you for being here.
Yeah, happy to be here.
So we're going to start out with some really basic questions about things that I think we all probably go through, which is anxiety.
Yeah.
So help us just understand the basic definition. What is anxiety?
So anxiety is just a normal emotion that we all experience, that it tells us that we are under stress or that there's a perceived danger going on. So it's totally normal, but some people experience it way more than somebody without clinical anxiety. So what that means is they might have relationship distress because they're anxious so much. They might have trouble being productive at work, or they might even have GI issues, heart issues, because of all of these emotions.
So anxiety can be a little, it can be a lot, it can be something that we just experience when we're having everyday stress,
Yeah.
or a little bit more stress, or it can be something that's really, as you just said, impacting us more severely. How do we know the difference between you're obviously just having a really stressful time and this is regular anxiety that's normal versus something you probably need to come see somebody like yourself for?
Yeah. So I help people by kind of thinking through a series of questions. So first, can you tell me why you're anxious? If you're anxious because you've got a big project coming up at work, that's a normal thing. You know why. The second question is, okay, if you know why, does it feel like the stress is proportionate to the actual thing that's happening? Okay. If both of those are true, it's probably normal anxiety. It's something that maybe we need to work through our stress, but it's not necessarily clinical. But if you don't know why you're anxious, or you feel like your reactions to things are maybe out of proportion to what you normally experience, that's more like a clinical anxiety. The third thing is, in order for something to be clinical anxiety, it actually has to have lasted for 6 months. And so we'll address things earlier, but I wouldn't give somebody a diagnosis of clinical anxiety if it hadn't been going on for that long.
So what are the most common causes or triggers of anxiety, especially in this fast-paced world we have today?
So I would say it's different for everybody. It's based on our history and our unique life circumstances. But I would say in general, the actual trigger is that the world is so fast paced. So we don't always necessarily have the coping mechanisms to deal with that. Our brains weren't designed to deal with social media and all these inputs all the time. So then you throw in things like stressful jobs, a poor economy, political instability, and we have the perfect recipe for somebody to experience anxiety.
How does anxiety impact your relationships with friends, family, spouses? Probably get the brunt of a lot of that. Kids, even though they're probably the cause of your anxiety, at least mine. But how can anxiety impact those relationships?
Yeah. So again, that's going to kind of be dependent on how the person's experiencing anxiety, but I'll give you some examples. So, like in a marriage, if somebody is very anxious, they're probably going to be what I call monitoring a lot. They're going to be monitoring their spouse's emotions more than maybe you or I would. And in that situation, they're going to be either hesitant to bring up issues, or they're going to be constantly, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" Those kind of things that can cause more conflict in a relationship. So it can go either way. With parenting, sometimes we actually put our own anxieties on our kids, and then we start to see those come out in our kids. We don't want that, but that's one of those things that just can happen. It's a byproduct. With friends, sometimes we withdraw and it makes it harder to be in social situations. The other thing is sometimes it makes me what I call wishy-washy. So, like, maybe there's a moment where I really feel like I need my friends, but then a friend needs me and I'm way too pulled back because of my anxiety. So it causes a lot of instability when you're anxious.
What are some effective coping strategies or techniques you recommend for managing anxiety on the daily?
So I always start with talking to people about this thing we have called the vagus nerve. So it's a nerve that starts in your brain stem and runs all the way into your GI tract. What we want to help manage anxiety is what we call better vagal tone. There's lots of little simple things that we can do to help with that. So, breathing exercises, deep breathing from your belly is really helpful for your vagus nerve. Even splashing cold water on your face actually activates that vagus nerve and helps you to calm down some. I'll even have people go for quick walks more throughout the day. And then a massive thing is limiting caffeine exposure because caffeine is going to go ahead and activate all of those things that we're trying to actually calm down.
You know what I think is funny that you say that is I can sit in front of a camera all day long and talk, and it's no big deal. But if you make me stand up in front of a ton of people, I get so nervous. And I've learned if I have a big presentation at work, do not coffee is my treat after I've successfully
Not before.
presented, not before, because it does make me so anxious that I'm literally shaking and talking 1,000 miles a minute. And then I get done and I'm like, cool, nobody understood anything I just said. But because I was so nervous.
Exactly. So, coffee causes you to be jittery already. And sometimes that's how we feel when we're anxious. And so, our body equates that with anxiety. So, it's a totally natural thing.
It sounds like a lot of the things that you were saying, though, like the deep breathing, the walk, the splashing of water, kind of how we always already talked about the world being so fast paced. All of those things seem to stop you and let you take a moment.
Exactly. So, what a lot of people try to do is before they physically calm down, they try to talk themselves out of the anxiety. So, yes, eventually you can reason with yourself on, okay, I'm not actually in danger. But if your body's still freaking out, you're not going to be able to have that logical conversation with yourself.
So it's all about a mind-body connection.
Exactly.
How do we know, like physically, mentally, like you've kind of talked about, like we retreat away, but that's something you probably noticed over a little more of a period of time. But specifically, if we're having a moment of anxiety, like before our big speech or just freaking out, what are some of those physical signs that we can tell, like, oh, maybe we're having like a little bit of a mild anxiety attack, and that's when we need to stop and take some breaths and do some things?
Yeah. So, it can be a range of things. Headaches for some people are a signal that maybe they've been stressed or anxious throughout the day. Some people, their heart rate spikes. Maybe your breathing's more shallow than it has been. That kind of takes a little bit of a check in, but it's quick. For some people, they'll have stomach issues if they're feeling anxious, like before a presentation, those kind of things. Some people start sweating. Some people feel actual muscle weakness or shaking. That's why some people think anxiety attacks or heart attacks because they do often come on with these real physical symptoms.
I had a little bit of a stressful time in the year of 2020. I don't know if anybody else had a bad year, that rough year. But I remember thinking I was having a heart attack or something, and I had been to like my allergist because I was like, oh, I can't breathe, and then nothing was wrong, and then I had gone to a my GI doctor, and I was like, maybe I'm having heartburn or something. Finally, was still having all these episodes and went to one of our critical care doctors. I'm like, am I having a heart attack? What is happening? He goes like, I think you have anxiety. And I'm like, I've never had that before. Again, what on earth happened in 2020 that would have caused any of that? Especially working here in healthcare. But it was funny because he told me, he was like, turn off your computer at 5 o'clock, go back to regularly exercising, like make sure you're sleeping. Cause those were not things that we were doing. And at that time, and it was crazy because I had no idea that's what it was. And that's what we were having issues with. But you're right. I felt like something was physically wrong. Like I was having breathing issues or something. And then it was like, oh, it's anxiety. I was like, stop, take a breath, get away from your
Something
stress.
important about what you just said, though, is when you actually do stop and turn off your computer, turn off the notifications, you can actually have a spike in anxiety before it gets better.
Really?
Because your body is now, there's no stimulation. What do I do? Is something wrong? And it has to come back to that equilibrium of that being your norm.
So like everything else, it might get a little bit worse before it gets better.
Yeah,
Okay.
unfortunately.
That's interesting. Because
I've heard that before.
You're probably right, though, because almost like FOMO, of fear of missing that email or something. Oh my God, now I'm like stirring myself up. And then
Well, and
letting-
our coping mechanisms are to drown things out. That's just the cultural norm right now. And so when you're actually turning things off, doing things like reading a book, walking your dog without scrolling your phone at the same time, there's so much less input.
So one of the topics of anxiety that I feel like a lot of us probably Go through and or I think we joke about it on social media, but it's one of those things like, oh, you make plans, but then if the last second someone cancels, you're like, oh, I'm not mad about it. Like I'm happy just to
Yeah.
stay in my pajamas and stay at home. Or sometimes it's FOMO, like, oh, I want to be there. I didn't get the invite. But then sometimes when you're invited, you're like, oh gosh, I really wish I didn't have to go tonight. What is it with our friendship specific relationships and hanging out with one another? It gives us so much anxiety sometimes.
I think it's more about leaving the comfort of our space. It's feeling like there's another energy expenditure. And we know if we can get ourselves out of the house, we'll feel good about it. But right now, I feel like there's this part of our culture where friendships are on the checklist instead of part of the thing that feeds us and helps us feel better. And so I think it's a perspective shift for us of why am I going to do these things?
Isn't it one of those things though, that as soon as you get home, you're like, oh, I'm so glad I went.
Yes, always.
Something that we needed to refill of our cup, but it does feel like another burden or, like you said, another thing on our to-do list.
Yeah, and sometimes the reality is those things may actually not be what we want to do, but we know that friendships are important. Relationships are part of how we survive in the world. And so sometimes when we're tired, we still go do those social things. And yeah, we may be more tired afterward, but it's worth it for the benefit of the relationship.
So, how important is our healthy lifestyle, such as food, exercise, sleep, and managing anxiety?
Yeah, it's so important because that's what establishes your baseline. If your brain doesn't have good nutrition, if your brain doesn't have good sleep, it's not going to be functioning at its best for you to actually combat anxiety when all of these inputs are coming in or when the stressful situation at work or home comes up. Like, let's be real, when your toddler comes up screaming at you, if you're exhausted, it's way easier to snap on them, which, by the way, irritability is actually an anxiety symptom. So we see those things coming out more when we're exhausted. If I haven't eaten a meal in 12 hours, I'm going to be way more likely to say something I regret, or it's going to be way harder to actually manage a situation that's not that big of a deal.
I told Brooklyn the other day we had to go to lunch because I was really I had been noticing that a lot of the emails I was getting that day were starting to trigger, and I go, "We have to go eat, or else I'm gonna probably get fired. Like, we have to go right now." So, I think you're right. Being hangry, being tired, those things are hard.
Yeah. There's my clients who are religious. Sometimes we talk about this story where God sends an angel to Elijah, and the ultimate solution to his depression is a nap and a snack.
Yeah. So, do you have any tips of what kind of diet, tips for sleep, exercise?
Yeah, I think in general, starting with talking to your PCP is a really good place because everybody's going to be a little bit different. But in general, sleep, one of the big things, put the electronics down. Put the electronics down before bed. Figure out a different way to relax. I think that one's huge. Actually, getting 7 to 8 hours of sleep, also huge. Figuring out what kind of eating works for you. So maybe it's cutting out one fast food meal a week. Maybe it's that simple. Maybe it's I don't eat enough protein and I notice I feel better when I do. It's all about experimenting what works best for you.
So, I know we talked about lifestyle and nutrition, exercise, sleep.
Yeah.
Another thing I wanted to ask you is alcohol and its impact on anxiety.
A lot of people use alcohol to cope with mental health. And let's be real, it works in the moment. It is a depressant. And so it helps you relax, but it's also a depressant. It's a substance, it's changing how your brain is working. And so once you're either hungover or coming off the impacts of the alcohol, you may notice worse depression. You may notice worse anxiety. And so it's not a good long term solution. Um, we have to be real. It works in the moment for a lot of people, um, but there's a lot better options out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if I'm working with somebody who is struggling with depression, anxiety, PTSD, we're usually monitoring alcohol intake as well. Not everybody needs to cut it out, but are we using it as a crutch or is it something social? Those kind of things.
Sometimes I think anxiety falls into the realm of obviously mental health, and that can always be hard for people to admit that they're struggling with. You've given us some really great information today, but if someone does want to dive in a little deeper to this topic with a professional like yourself, what kind of encouragement could you give them to take that next step?
Yeah, I think my main encouragement is it's okay. It's okay to need the help. It doesn't mean you're even going to need the help long term. There may be a situation going on right now that you need support through, and that's normal. We all do. So I would encourage people, build your support system first. Build your actual community, because a therapist like myself is only going to be with you an hour a week. You need a community around you as well. But as far as reaching out to someone like myself, I would encourage you start with your PCP. They'll have recommendations and they can talk to you on whether you need medication or not as well. If you want to look at therapists for yourself, there is a website called Psychology Today, and you can filter, do you want a male or female therapist? What's your insurance? What's the topic you want to talk about? And you can actually go read bios and watch video clips of these therapists talking to you, so you can pick somebody that you feel like would fit well with you. If you have an OB with Covenant, you automatically have access to free services through our office. But for everybody else in the community, we still have a ton of great therapists that can help.
It's like speed dating for your therapist.
Mhm.
I'm going to like it.
And a lot of therapists will start with a free 15-minute consultation. And so you can call, actually talk to them, see if you like them, and figure out from there as well.
Because it's got to be a good fit between the two of you, right? You have to be vulnerable and trusting and open and honest with what you're about to say. So it's got to be a good relationship.
Exactly. You've got to feel confident that we know what we're doing, but you've also got to feel comfortable talking to us.
Well, Kara, is there anything about anxiety that we went over today that you think that we really need to reiterate, or anything else you want to mention?
I really want to go back to, anxiety is not a villain. You have anxiety as an emotion for a reason. It tells you things. It's a messenger. It's just the dose. Do we have too much anxiety? So don't be afraid of your anxiety. Let's work with it.
So at the end of every episode, we want you to pull a trending topic out of our bowl and help us understand it a little bit better.
Yeah.
So Brooklyn, let's see what she's going to be talking about today.
Okay. Trending micro practices, physical, mental, and spiritual. So I think the whole idea of micro practices is coming around because we need bite-sized things, because we have bite-sized amounts of time. So I think it's something actually really practical to implement into our days. And I think something even kind of like we talked about earlier, the splashing water on your face, meditation, check-ins with yourself, all of those things for somebody who is of faith, reading scripture, listening to music that feeds them in that way. All of those kind of things are actually really practical and really helpful, because it's all about filling our bucket, doing things that are good for us to combat a lot of the negative influences. And so I'm a fan of micro practices.
We say micro, but what is micro? 1 minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes?
You define micro. It's, if you're a person who has hours of free time a day, 10, 15 minutes doing a meditation might be a micro practice. But I think for most of us, it's going to be more kind of the 1 to 5 minute range.
So I know meditation looks different for everyone probably, but say you're starting out, what's a good way to start if you want to add that into your routine?
Yeah, first of all, start small. You will be distracted while you're trying to focus on things, but that's okay. That's all part of the process. It's all about just drawing yourself back in. I actually usually have people start with like the Calm app or even just YouTube meditations. So somebody's talking you through kind of what to visualize. Or I'll have somebody pick a mantra, kind of something that they're needing that encouragement. And meditation can even just be thinking about that one saying. 5-10 seconds. That counts.
Okay. Thank you, Kara, for joining us today, and thank you all for listening.
If you guys have any ideas, follow us on Instagram for Covenant Help, and we will see y'all next time.
This podcast explores health-related topics with experts in their specialty for entertainment purposes only.
The information shared and discussed should not be considered as medical advice under any circumstance and is not intended to replace professional medical advice.
The views expressed do not reflect the views of Covenant Health System. For questions related to your personal health, always contact your physician.
Most of us know someone who has faced breast cancer, and it's common to think, that's not a concern for me right now. However, with a growing number of young women receiving this diagnosis, it might be time to start being more aware and proactive about breast health.